A clerk laughed at a boy buying Rocky DVDs, until Stallone stepped forward and said, "I wrote that." Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The ironclad boxing gym was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a gritty, sweat-soaked sanctuary carved out of a converted warehouse in a forgotten industrial corner of the city. The air was thick with the primal sense of old leather, liniment, and the metallic tang of sheer, unadulterated effort. The only music was the rhythmic thud of gloves on heavy bags, the sharp snap of jump ropes against the worn wooden floor, and the guttural grunts of men and women pushing their bodies to, and beyond, their perceived limits. Elias Thorne, a man whose own battles were more often of a quiet, intellectual nature, sat on a splintered wooden bench near the entrance, a silent, unassuming observer in this world of explosive, physical expression. He was a writer, a historian of the human spirit, and he was drawn to such places, to these crucibles where character was forged, where the raw, unvarnished truth of human struggle was on full display. He held a small, leather-bound journal in his lap, its pages filled with his neat, almost microscopic script. Observations, fragments of overheard conversations, reflections on the nature of courage, discipline, and the often invisible wars waged within the human heart. In his pocket, his fingers idly traced the smooth, worn contours of a pair of miniature boxing gloves, a keepsake from his father, a man who had taught him that the most important fights are often the ones fought not for a title or a prize, but for one's own quiet, personal sense of honor and integrity. His attention was drawn to a scene unfolding near the main ring. A young woman, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s, was shadowboxing, her movements fluid, powerful, yet tinged with a certain desperate, almost frantic energy. Her face, etched with a fierce concentration, was also shadowed by a profound, underlying sadness. She moved with a grace that was at odds with the raw, untutored power of her punches, a dancer engaged in a brutal, solitary ballet. Standing outside the ropes, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of cold, dismissive contempt, was the gym's owner and head coach, a man known only as Rico. Rico was a former professional fighter whose own promising career had been derailed by a combination of injury and a notoriously bad attitude. He was a man who seemed to view the world through a lens of bitter, cynical disappointment, a man who mistook cruelty for coaching, fear for respect. "Is that all you got, princess?" Rico sneered, his voice a low, grating sound that cut through the gym's rhythmic clamor. "You're hitting like you're afraid to break a nail. My kid sister throws a better jab than that." The young woman, whose name Elias had overheard as Isabella, flinched at his words, her rhythm faltering for a fraction of a second. She didn't respond, didn't look at him. She just kept punching, her movements now a little tighter, a little more forced. "You're wasting my time," Rico continued, his voice dripping with scorn. "You don't have the heart for this. You don't have the killer instinct. You're just soft. Maybe you should stick to ballet." He spat on the floor, a gesture of ultimate contempt, then turned his back on her and swaggered over to a group of his more favored, more brutish fighters, his laughter a harsh, ugly sound as he began to hold court. Isabella stopped punching. Her arms dropped to her sides, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with a mixture of exhaustion, humiliation, and a profound, silent rage. She stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure of defiance and despair, her spirit clearly wounded, yet not, Elias sensed, entirely broken. The other fighters in the gym, as was so often the case in such environments, pretended not to have noticed. They were all too familiar with Rico's brand of motivational abuse, and too afraid of becoming its next target to intervene. Elias watched, his jaw tightening, a familiar, cold anger settling in his chest. He had seen this before, this toxic dynamic, this abuse of a coach's sacred trust. The miniature boxing gloves in his pocket felt heavy, a silent reproach. He knew, with a certainty that was as solid and unyielding as the iron weights stacked against the far wall, that he could not let this pass. This was not just about a young woman's boxing aspirations. It was about her spirit, her dignity, her right to pursue her passion without being systematically, cruelly torn down. He closed his journal, his quiet observations now demanding a more direct, more personal response. He rose slowly from the bench, his movements deliberate, his gaze fixed on the solitary, trembling figure of a young woman in the ring. Elias didn't approach Isabella immediately. He waited until Rico was fully engrossed with his sycophantic audience, his back turned to the rest of the gym. He then walked slowly towards the ring, his footsteps making little sound on the dusty floorboards. He didn't climb through the ropes. He simply stood on the outside, his hands resting on the top rope, his presence a quiet, unassuming counterpoint to the gym's aggressive energy. Isabella was still standing in the center of the ring, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. She was trying to control her breathing, to fight back the tears of frustration and humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her. "That was a beautiful combination," Elias said, his voice low, calm, yet carrying a surprising resonance in the noisy gym. "The way you shifted your weight, the fluidity of your movement, it was like watching a dancer, a very powerful, very graceful dancer." Isabella looked up, startled, her eyes, the color of dark, stormy honey, wide with surprise and a defensive wariness. She clearly didn't know who he was, this quiet, older man in the tweed jacket who spoke of boxing in terms of dance and grace. I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, her voice a little shaky. "Rico said, he said I was pathetic." "Rico," Elias stated, his voice still calm, but now imbued with a firm, unwavering conviction, is a man who sees the world through a very narrow, very bitter lens. He sees only brute force, only aggression. He doesn't see the art, the discipline, the profound inner strength that you so clearly possess. Isabella stared at him, a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning, fragile hope in her eyes. It was as if he had spoken a language her heart understood, a language that had been silenced for too long by Rico's relentless barrage of criticism. "But I'm not strong enough," she protested, the coach's cruel words still echoing in her mind. "I don't have that killer instinct." "Strength, Isabella," Elias said gently, "takes many forms. There is the strength of the fist, yes, but there is also the strength of the spirit, the strength to endure, to persevere, to keep getting back up, even when the world, or your own coach, is trying to knock you down. And that kind of strength, my dear," he added, his gaze holding hers with a quiet, compelling intensity, "is far more rare and far more powerful than any killer instinct." He saw a new light begin to dawn in her eyes, a flicker of her own, long-suppressed self-worth beginning to reassert itself. "You have a gift, Isabella," Elias continued, "a unique combination of grace and power. Don't let a man like Rico, a man blinded by his own failures, his own bitterness, convince you otherwise. Your style is not a weakness. It is your greatest strength. It is what makes you you." And that, he concluded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, is a very formidable thing to be. A single tear escaped from Isabella's eye and traced a slow path down her cheek. But this time, it was not a tear of humiliation, but of a profound cathartic release. To have her unique quality seen, acknowledged, celebrated by this quiet, perceptive stranger was a validation she hadn't even known she was so desperately seeking. The miniature boxing gloves in Elias's pocket felt like a quiet affirmation. He had stepped into the ring, in his own way, and had landed the first, most important, blow in the fight for a young woman's spirit. Isabella continued to look at Elias, her expression a mixture of gratitude and a lingering, deeply ingrained self-doubt. "But how do I fight him?" she whispered, her gaze flicking nervously towards Rico, who was now laughing loudly at one of his own crude jokes. "How do I prove him wrong?" "You don't have to prove anything to him, Isabella," Elias replied gently. "You only have to prove it to yourself. And the way you do that is not by trying to become the kind of fighter he wants you to be, but by embracing, by perfecting the kind of fighter you are." He paused, then asked, "Why do you box, Isabella?" What brought you to this place, to this difficult, demanding art? The question seemed to take her by surprise. She looked down at her wrapped hands, then back at Elias, a new, thoughtful expression on her face. I don't know exactly, she began, her voice hesitant. My brother, he used to box. He was really good. Everyone said so. He was my hero. A shadow crossed her face, a flicker of a deep, familiar pain. He passed away a few years ago. An accident. Elias listened, his heart aching with a quiet, empathetic sorrow. He understood the profound, often complex, ways in which loss could shape a life, could drive a person to seek solace, or perhaps a form of connection, in the most unexpected of places. After he was gone, Isabella continued, her voice barely a whisper. I felt lost, and I found his old gloves, and I started coming here. It felt like a way to be close to him, to keep a part of him alive. When I'm in the ring, when I'm moving, it's like I can almost feel him here with me. It's like we're dancing together, you know? Her words were a raw, beautiful, and heartbreaking confession. She wasn't here to become a champion, not in the conventional sense. She was here to dance with the ghost of her beloved brother, to keep his memory, his spirit, alive through the shared language of the sport he had loved. Yes, Isabella, Elias said softly, his own voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. I believe I do know. He thought of his own brother, of the tarnished bronze star he carried, of the quiet, ongoing conversation he had with his memory every single day. What you are doing here, Elias continued, his voice imbued with a profound, resonant respect, is not just boxing. It is an act of love, an act of remembrance. And that, my dear, is a source of strength far more powerful than any killer instinct Rico could ever comprehend. He then reached into his satchel and took out the small, leather-bound journal he always carried. He opened it to a blank page. Tell me about your brother, Isabella, he said gently. Tell me a story. Because stories, like memories, have a power of their own. And sometimes, the best way to honor those we have lost is to give their story a voice, to share it, to ensure that their light, their spirit, continues to shine in the world. Isabella looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and a dawning, grateful understanding. And then, she began to speak, her voice hesitant at first, then growing in strength and confidence as she shared the story of her brother, of his life, of his passion, of the profound, enduring love that had brought her to this gritty, unlikely sanctuary. And Elias, the quiet historian, the keeper of forgotten narratives, simply listened, his pen moving swiftly across the page, capturing not just the words but the heart, the soul of a story that deserved to be told, to be honored, to be remembered. As Isabella spoke, a remarkable transformation occurred. The hesitant, self-doubting young woman who had been so close to defeat just a short while ago seemed to recede, replaced by a confident, articulate storyteller, her voice filled with a passionate, loving remembrance of her brother. She spoke of his infectious laughter, of his unwavering optimism, of his dedication to the sport he loved. She spoke of the way he had taught her to dance, of their shared dreams, of the profound, unbreakable bond they had shared. As she spoke, the raw, untutored power Elias had seen in her boxing began to make sense. It was not just physical strength. It was emotional strength, a channeling of her love, her grief, her fierce determination to keep her brother's memory alive, into every punch, every movement. Elias listened, his pen flying across the page, capturing not just the details of her story, but the profound, universal truths it contained, the enduring power of love, the resilience of a human spirit in the face of loss, the healing power of remembrance. When she had finished, a quiet, almost sacred silence settled over their small corner of the gym. Isabella looked at Elias, her eyes still shining, but with a new, calmer light. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for listening. No one has ever really let me talk about him like that before. It was my privilege, Isabella, Elias replied, his own voice a little hoarse with emotion. Your brother sounds like he was a remarkable young man, and his spirit, his strength, clearly lives on in you. Just then, Rico, his ego apparently recovered from his earlier dismissal, swaggered back towards the ring, a cruel, mocking sneer on his face. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Story time over, princess? Or are you and the old man going to write a book of poetry together? Because this is a gym, in case you forgot. A place for fighting, not for feelings. Elias slowly closed his journal and rose to his feet, his movements deliberate, his gaze, when it met Rico's, cold and hard as polished steel. You are mistaken, sir, Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Rico pause, his sneer faltering slightly. This is about fighting. It is about the most important fight any of us will ever face. The fight to maintain our dignity, our integrity, our humanity in a world that often seems determined to strip us of all three. He then did something that stunned not only Rico, but also Isabella and the other fighters who had begun to gather, drawn by the escalating tension. He began to slowly, methodically, take off his tweed jacket, folding it neatly and placing it on the bench. He then began to unbutton the cuffs of his simple, white shirt, rolling up his sleeves to reveal forearms that were surprisingly sinewy, corded with a strength that belied his age and his scholarly demeanor. You speak of fighting, of killer instinct, Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You speak of toughness. But you, sir, know nothing of true toughness. You are merely a bully, a coward who preys on the vulnerability of others to mask his own profound weakness. Rico stared at him, his face a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, uneasy apprehension. What were you doing, old man? He stammered. Elias ignored him. He turned to Isabella. Isabella, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Would you be so kind as to lend me your brother's gloves? Isabella, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a fierce, protective loyalty, quickly retrieved the worn, leather gloves from her gym bag and handed them to Elias. Elias took them, his fingers tracing the worn, familiar contours. He then turned back to Rico, who was now looking genuinely alarmed. You wish to teach this young woman a lesson in fighting, Rico? Elias said, his voice a quiet, deadly challenge. Very well. Allow me to offer a demonstration. A demonstration of a different kind of fighting. A different kind of strength. He began to pull on the gloves, his movements sure, practiced, the movements of a man who was no stranger to the sweet science. The air in the gym crackled with an electric, almost unbearable tension. The quiet historian, the man of words, was about to step into the ring. And everyone in the ironclad boxing gym knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that they were about to witness something they would never, ever forget. The sight of Elias Thorne, the quiet, scholarly man in the simple white shirt, pulling on a pair of worn boxing gloves was so unexpected, so utterly out of context, that it sent a wave of stunned silence through the entire gym. The rhythmic thud of the heavy bags, the snap of the jump ropes, the grunts of exertion, it all ceased, replaced by a profound, almost reverent hush. The fighters, who had been observing the unfolding drama with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, now drew closer, their faces a mask of disbelief and a dawning, intense anticipation. Rico, the blustering, arrogant coach, stared at Elias as if he were seeing a ghost. The old man's transformation had been subtle, yet absolute. The gentle, unassuming rider was gone, replaced by a figure of quiet, formidable power, his eyes, the color of a winter storm, holding a lifetime of unspoken stories of hidden strengths. You're crazy, old man, Rico stammered, his voice losing all of its earlier bravado, now tinged with a note of genuine, almost childlike fear. He took an involuntary step back. Elias finished pulling on the gloves, the leather creaking softly in the quiet gym. He didn't adopt a flashy, aggressive stance. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, yet perfectly balanced, his presence radiating a calm, an underscore unshakable confidence that was far more intimidating than any of Rico's loud, empty threats. I'm not here to hurt you, Rico, Elias said, his voice still low, still calm, yet carrying in an unmistakable and underscore edge of steel. I'm here to teach you a lesson in respect, a lesson you so clearly, so desperately need to learn. He then began to move, his feet light on the canvas of the ring, his movements fluid, economical, a beautiful, dangerous dance. He didn't throw a single punch. He simply moved. He circled Rico, his footwork a masterclass in precision and control, his body a study in relaxed, coiled power. He was a historian of movement, of the sweet science, his body remembering lessons learned long ago in other quieter gyms from other, wiser teachers. Rico, in contrast, seemed clumsy, leaden-footed. He tried to follow Elias's movements, tried to adopt a defensive posture, but he was always a step behind, always off balance. The quiet, unassuming old man was, in a way that defied all logic, completely, utterly dominating him, without laying a single glove on him. The other fighters watched, mesmerized. They were witnessing something extraordinary, a display of skill, of mastery, that went far beyond mere physical strength. They were witnessing the art of boxing in its purest, most profound form. Isabella, standing just outside the ropes, her brother's gloves now on Elias's hands, watched with tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sorrow or of humiliation. They were tears of awe, of a profound, cathartic joy. She saw in Elias's movements the same grace, the same fluidity she had always felt within herself, the quality that Rico had so cruelly dismissed as softness. She saw her own style, her own spirit, validated, celebrated, transformed from a perceived weakness into a thing of profound, undeniable beauty and strength. After a few long, silent minutes of this mesmerizing, one-sided dance, Elias stopped. He stood in the center of the ring, his breathing even, his gaze fixed on the now sweating, utterly demoralized figure of Rico. "You see, Rico," Elias said softly, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent gym. "True fighting is not about brute force. It is not about anger or aggression or a killer instinct. It is about control. It is about discipline. It is about understanding your opponent, yes, but more importantly, it is about understanding yourself. It is an art, a science, a conversation. And you, sir," he added, his voice a quiet, devastating indictment, "have been shouting for so long that you have forgotten how to listen." He then slowly, deliberately, began to unlace the gloves. The lesson was over, and it had been delivered without a single punch being thrown. The silence in the ironclad boxing gym was a heavy, resonant thing, broken only by the sound of Rico's ragged, unsteady breathing. He stood frozen in the ring, his face a mask of utter, abject humiliation. He had been defeated completely and utterly, not by superior physical force, but by a quiet, profound, and undeniable moral and technical superiority. He had been exposed, his blustering, bullying persona stripped away to reveal the small, insecure, and ultimately untalented man beneath. Elias, having removed the gloves, handed them gently back to Isabella, who took them with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. He then stepped through the ropes, his movements as quiet and unassuming as they had been when he had first entered the gym. He walked over to the bench where he had left his tweed jacket and his satchel and began to gather his belongings. The other fighters in the gym watched him, their expressions a mixture of awe, respect, and a dawning, revolutionary hope. They had just witnessed a paradigm shift, a quiet, yet seismic, reordering of their world. The tyrant had been deposed, his authority shattered, his philosophy of cruelty and intimidation exposed as the hollow, pathetic thing it truly was. Rico, finally, seemed to find the strength to move. He stumbled out of the ring, his face a pale, sickly gray, and without a word, without a glance at anyone, he shuffled towards his small, cluttered office and disappeared inside, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. It was the sound of an era ending. The fighters, as if released from a long, oppressive spell, began to stir. They looked at each other, then at Maria, a new, tentative sense of community, of shared possibility, dawning in their eyes. One of them, a young man with a kind, open face, approached Maria. "Isabella," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet respect. "What that old man said about your style, about your strength, he was right. We all saw it. You have a gift." Maria looked at him, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "Thank you, David," she said. That means a lot." David then turned to the other fighters. "Listen up, everyone," he said, his voice gaining a new, confident authority. "Rico's way, it's over. We've all had enough of it. But this gym, this is our place, our community. And we're not going to let it die just because he was a lousy coach and an even lousier human being." A murmur of agreement went through the assembled fighters. "What if," David continued, his eyes shining with a new, bold idea, "what if we ran this place ourselves? As a cooperative? We could all chip in, share the responsibilities. We could create the kind of gym we've all always wanted. A place of respect, of support, of real, genuine community." The idea, so radical, so empowering, seemed to ignite a spark in the room. The fighters began to talk amongst themselves, their voices filled with a new, excited energy. They spoke of creating a new culture, a new way of being, a gym built not on fear, but on a shared passion for the sweet science, a shared commitment to mutual growth and support. Elias, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had not intended to start a revolution. He had simply intended to defend a young woman's dignity. But sometimes a single act of quiet courage can have unforeseen and beautiful consequences. He saw Maria at the center of the hopeful, animated group, her voice, once so hesitant, now clear and confident as she shared her own ideas, her own vision. She was no longer just a dancer in the ring. She was a leader, a quiet, resilient heart around which a new, better community was beginning to form. As the fighters' excited conversation continued to build, a new figure emerged from the small, cluttered office where Rico had retreated. It was not Rico, but an older, well-dressed man whose face was a mask of grim resignation. He was, Elias surmised, the building's owner, the silent financial partner in Rico's failed enterprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "my name is Mr. Sterling, and it seems I owe all of you a profound apology. I have been an absentee landlord, and I have allowed a man unworthy of the position to create a toxic, disrespectful environment in what should have been a sanctuary of discipline and mutual respect. For that, I am truly sorry." He looked around at the faces of the fighters, his gaze lingering for a moment on Maria, then on Elias. "I have just had a final conversation with Rico," he continued. "He will not be returning. His management of this facility is, as of this moment, terminated." A quiet, heartfelt cheer went up from the assembled fighters. "As for the future of this gym," Mr. Sterling said, "I was prepared to shut it down, to cut my losses. But," he paused, his gaze returning to Elias, then to the hopeful, determined faces of the fighters, "I have just been witness to something remarkable. A quiet display of courage, of solidarity, of a profound commitment to a different, better way of doing things. And it has inspired me." He then looked at David, who had first voiced the idea of a cooperative. "Your idea, young man," he said, "of a community-run gym, it is a bold one, a risky one from a business perspective. But," he added, a faint, almost wistful smile touching his lips, "it is also a beautiful one. And I am, for the first time in a long time, inclined to invest in beauty, in community, rather than just in profit." He then made a proposition that stunned them all. He offered to lease them the gym for a nominal fee, to cover the utilities for the first year, to give them the space, the opportunity to build their new vision, their new community from the ground up. "The Ironclad Boxing Gym is yours," he said simply, "to shape, to build, to make into the kind of place it always should have been. I only ask that you honor the spirit of what happened here today. The spirit of respect, of dignity, of a strength that is measured not in the power of one's fists, but in the quality of one's heart. The fighters were speechless, their faces a mixture of disbelief and an overwhelming, joyous gratitude. They had not just won a small victory against a bully. They had been given a future, a chance to create something new, something better, something that was truly their own. Maria looked at Elias, her eyes shining with tears, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. She mouthed a silent thank you, a message that needed no sound to convey its profound, heartfelt meaning. Elias simply nodded in return, a quiet, profound satisfaction settling over him. He had come to this gym as a silent observer, a chronicler of human struggle. He was leaving it as a quiet, unwitting catalyst for a small, beautiful, and profoundly hopeful revolution. The miniature boxing gloves in his pocket felt like a quiet celebration, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to rise, to connect, to build a better world, one small, courageous act of defiance at a time. The gym, once a place of tense, isolated effort, was now a vibrant hub of collaborative energy. The fighters, liberated from Rico's oppressive reign, gathered in an impromptu meeting, their voices filled with a newfound excitement and a shared sense of purpose. They talked about creating a new name for the gym, one that reflected their new, community-focused ethos. They discussed creating a formal code of conduct, a set of principles based on mutual respect, support, and encouragement. They planned training schedules, mentorship programs for new members, even a small fund to help fighters who might be struggling financially. It was a beautiful, chaotic, and profoundly hopeful scene. Maria, who had been so close to abandoning her passion just a short while ago, was now at the heart of it all. Her quiet strength, her empathetic heart, her profound understanding of the importance of dignity and respect made her a natural, if reluctant, leader. The other fighters, men and women who had once seen her as soft, now looked to her for guidance, for her thoughtful, considered opinions. She was not a loud or domineering leader, but a quiet, unifying force, a testament to the very different kind of strength Elias had seen in her from the beginning. Elias, his own work now done, prepared to take his leave. He had no desire to be a part of their new governance, no wish to be put on a pedestal. He was a storyteller, an observer, a quiet catalyst. His role was to witness, to understand, and sometimes to offer a gentle, guiding word. The rest was up to them. As he was slipping on his tweed jacket, Mr. Sterling, the owner, approached him. "Mr. Thorne," he said, a deep, genuine respect in his voice, "I feel I have learned a more valuable lesson in business and in life in the past hour than I have in the past 20 years. Thank you." "The thanks belong to these young people, Mr. Sterling," Elias replied, a modest smile on his face. "They possessed the courage all along. They just needed a chance to find their collective voice." "A voice you helped them to find," Sterling countered. "You are a remarkable man, Mr. Thorne. A quiet warrior in your own right." Elias simply nodded, accepting the compliment with a quiet grace. He then turned to leave, but not before catching Maria's eye one last time. She was surrounded by her fellow fighters, her face alight with a joy and a confidence that was a world away from the tear-streaked, humiliated girl he had first encountered. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look of profound, shared understanding passing between them. It was a look that said more than any words could. It spoke of a debt of gratitude, of a life changed, of a spirit rekindled. Elias stepped out of gym and into the cool, crisp air of the evening. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing train, seemed a world away from the quiet, hopeful revolution he had just witnessed. He felt a deep sense of peace, of a quiet, profound satisfaction. He had come to the ironclad boxing gym seeking stories of human struggle, and he had found one, a beautiful, unexpected story of oppression and liberation, of cruelty and compassion, of the enduring power of a quiet, principled stand to change not just a life, but a community. The miniature boxing gloves in his pocket felt light, almost buoyant, a symbol not of conflict, but of a hard-won and beautifully human victory. Elias walked home through the darkening city streets, the usual urban clamor a muted backdrop to his own quiet reflections. The events at the ironclad boxing gym had been a powerful, unexpected reminder of the themes that had so often preoccupied him in his own life and work. The nature of true strength, the abuse of power, the quiet resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative power of solidarity. He thought of Maria, of her journey from a silent, tearful victim to a quiet, courageous catalyst for change. He thought of the other fighters, their initial, fearful complicity transformed into a collective, empowering defiance. And he even thought of Rico, a man so consumed by his own bitterness, his own failures, that his only remaining tool was cruelty, a sad, pathetic figure who had, in the end, been defeated not by a superior physical force, but by the simple, undeniable power of human decency. He knew that the path ahead for the newly liberated gym would not be without its challenges. Building a true community, a culture of mutual respect and shared responsibility, was hard work. It required patience, communication, a willingness to listen, to compromise, to forgive. But he also knew that the fighters at the newly christened community ring, a name they had enthusiastically chosen, now possessed the most essential ingredient for success: a shared vision, a common purpose, and a profound, hard-won understanding of the importance of standing together. The miniature boxing gloves, which he now took from his pocket, seemed to hold a new significance. They were not just a memento of his father, a man who had fought his own quiet battles with dignity and grace. They were also now a symbol of Maria's fight, of the collective fight of all the young people at the gym. They were a testament to the fact that the most important rings are not always made of rope and canvas, and the most significant victories are not always measured in knockouts or championship belts. Sometimes, the greatest victory is simply in finding one's voice, in reclaiming one's dignity, in choosing to build a community of support rather than to perpetuate a cycle of abuse. As he reached his own quiet, book-lined apartment, he placed the miniature gloves on his desk, next to the tarnished bronze star that had belonged to his brother, and the smooth, patient river stone that had seen so much of his own solitary journey. They were a collection of quiet talismans, each one a story, each one a lesson, each one a reminder of the enduring, often unseen, but profoundly powerful currents of courage, resilience, and compassion that flowed through the human heart. The world, Elias reflected, was full of such stories, waiting to be witnessed, waiting to be told. And he was grateful, profoundly grateful, to have been a small, quiet part of this one. His belief in the quiet hero, the unassuming catalyst, was once again reaffirmed. The weeks that followed saw the community ring begin to flourish. The gym, once a place of fear and intimidation, was now a vibrant, welcoming space, its atmosphere filled with a new, collaborative energy. Elias, true to his word, became a quiet, occasional visitor, a friend of the gym. He would sit on the same splintered bench, his journal in his lap. But now, he was not just an observer. He was a part of the community, a respected elder, a quiet source of wisdom and encouragement. He watched as Maria, along with David and a small committee of other fighters, implemented their new vision. They established a mentorship program, pairing experienced boxers with newcomers, fostering a culture of support rather than competition. They started a youth outreach program, offering free classes to at-risk kids from the neighborhood, teaching them not just the techniques of boxing, but the principles of discipline, respect, and self-worth. They even painted over the gym's grimy walls, replacing the faded, aggressive posters of professional fighters with murals they had designed themselves, murals that depicted not just strength, but community, diversity, and the quiet, enduring power of the human spirit. Maria, in particular, seemed to have found her true calling. She was a natural teacher, her own experiences of being belittled and dismissed having given her a profound empathy for the struggles of others. She was patient, encouraging, her coaching style a gentle, supportive counterpoint to Rico's brutal tirades. She taught her students not just how to punch, but how to move, how to breathe, how to find their own unique rhythm, their own inner strength. She taught them that boxing, at its best, was not about violence, but about self-discovery, about the beautiful, difficult dance of mind, body, and spirit. One afternoon, as Elias was watching Maria work with a group of young, eager students, she caught his eye and smiled, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy and a deep, quiet gratitude. She then walked over to him, a small, neatly wrapped package in her hand. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with a warm, confident affection, "this is for you. From all of us." Elias, surprised and deeply touched, accepted the gift. He carefully unwrapped it. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a beautiful, hand-bound leather journal, its cover embossed with a simple, elegant image of a soaring knot-winger bird. "We wanted you to have a new place to write our stories," Maria said, her eyes shining. "And to thank you for helping us to find our own." Elias was speechless. He ran his hand over the smooth leather, his heart filled with an emotion so profound it was almost painful. He looked at Maria, at the strong, confident, compassionate young woman she had become, and he saw not just a fighter, but a leader, a teacher, a true champion of the human spirit. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Thank you all. This is a gift I will treasure always." He knew, in that moment, that the story of the ironclad boxing gym, now the community ring, was a story that would continue to unfold, to evolve, to inspire. And he was profoundly grateful and deeply humbled to have been a small, quiet part of its telling. The miniature boxing gloves on his desk at home, he knew, now had a new companion, a new testament to the enduring, redemptive power of a community that had chosen to fight, not against each other, but for each other, for a better, more compassionate, and more beautiful way of being.